So the Master Gardener program, a lot of people think that you have to be an expert on a gardening topic to become a part of it, but really we're people who love plants or love learning and want to make a difference in our community.
I had always had an interest in gardening, but I finally decided to act on it and get a little bit more involved after I got my first home. My favorite aspect is talking to new and novice gardeners and trying to get them interested in it the way I started out.
Master Gardeners are a part of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, and they're really helping their communities by building knowledge and also increasing access to different types of plants through their plant sales, or maybe educating people through their demonstration gardens.
The education that comes out of interaction with other master gardeners, volunteering in the gardens, as well as participating in the education sessions is what I look forward to. So if you love nature, you want to make things better in your community, in your backyard, this is a very good program to help you do so.
To become a Master Gardener, someone has to go through the Master Gardener training. One of my favorite parts of the Master Gardener training is when everybody comes to Iowa State University, and we call it Class on Campus. And it's such a fun day because people really want to be there. They just want to learn more.
One of the main reasons I started with the Master Gardener program was because I really wanted the education. I learned from the people and they learn from me, so we share all the knowledge that we gather.
With the self-confidence of learning more about things and trying different things, I'm more educated. I can kind of pass that on to my kids, and it's fun to be able to give back.
Master Gardener volunteers are amazing. They're these people who build partnerships and get things rolling in their community, whether it's volunteering as a Master Gardener as part of the county fair, or supporting 4-H youth who are really interested in vegetables or some other types of plants. Master Gardener volunteers can be a part of these different types of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach programs to really work as volunteers to extend the mission of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the third session of Become an EMTree. Observe your plants to prevent problems. I'm Suzette Striegel from Mahaska County. Please enter in the chat box where you're from and how you learned about these sessions. This is the third and final virtual session of Become an EMTree. It's our hope that you can watch all 3 sessions prior to attending hands-on workshops that will be held at the county level this fall. The workshops are initially planned for Dubuque, Mahaska, Polk, and Woodbury counties. Tonight's program has multiple presenters, and we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. The presenters are Lena Rodriguez Salamanca, as well as Jeff and Laura Isles. The session is titled Common Problems in Iowa, What Resources Are Out There? And we're going to start with Lena.
Thank you, Suzette, and thank you for joining us on this virtual program. So there is a lot of resources that we have available to you, and so we're going to walk through some of them today. And if you join us on part 1 of this virtual workshop, we talked about looking at your plants, often, carefully, and systematically, and taking photos of things that you think are strange, or things that are normal that you may remember, oh, I think this really is normal on this plant. It's part of enjoying your plants during the growing season, but it also can come in handy if you run into a problem. Because at the clinic, we do love photos. Photos give us a lot of clues when you're trying to solve a plant mystery. We do have some tips on how to go about taking photos of plant problems. And we will put those links in the chat box at the end of the presentation. So take lots of photos, enjoy your plants out there, the flowers, their smells. Right now, the crab apples in my backyard are smelling phenomenal, the pears, all the different things that are flowering. So enjoy that, take photos, and who knows, maybe it can come in handy later on. The main resource that I want to showcase today is the Horticulture and Home Pest News website. And this is a collaboration between the horticulture department, the entomology, and the plant pathology department at Iowa State University. So when you go into this website, the hortnews.extension.iostate.edu, we have a banner that rotates throughout the season and the year with important topics that are relevant to you right now. We also, if you look at the very top bar, you can see the people that contribute to this website. We do have news, an encyclopedia article page, resources and publications, videos, and FAQs. So I wanted to also point out that we have these 3 columns in here where you can have the yard and garden news, the most recent ones, the horticulture and home pest news, that is the newsletter and the articles here in the middle that are published twice a month during the growing season, and fall and winter months once a month. I'm not sharing. I am sorry. Forgot something very important. I feel like I just start over. Okay, I'm hiding that. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so welcome again. We wanted to remind you that we do want you looking at your plants and scouting often and taking lots of photos, as I was saying. And I will be posting these links on the chat. Now, in the horticulture and home pest news, as I was telling you, we have a lot of good resources for you that I want to showcase today. And you can see it here in the columns. We have the yard and garden news, the horticulture and home pest news, and timely topics. So you go to hortnews.extension.iostate.edu. And the first resource that I want to showcase here from this site is the encyclopedia articles. So over the years in the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic, we have compiled various encyclopedia articles that pertain to plant diseases, abiotic disorders, and insect problems. So this is like that encyclopedia art that I grew up with when I was in school, that you'll go to the library, you have all the volumes. This is our version of the virtual encyclopedia for you, for common problems and plants, trees, and shrubs in Iowa. And so to find that, you go on the very top on the menu where it says encyclopedia, and then you can select the category that you're interested to learn some more. Let's talk about the newsletter. So we do have, if you go to the Horticulture and Home Pest News and you click on that menu where it goes into news, then you can see what are the most recent articles that have been published. Now, another option is that you can subscribe to the newsletter. So in that same menu where you go into news, you can go here on the mailing list and type your email address and click on subscribe. And then you will receive the newsletter articles into your email once the issue is hot out of the presses. Now, if you ever need help with a plant problem, keep in mind that in your county offices, there may be someone that can help, and they get in touch with us in the clinic. Or if you want to get in touch directly with us, we're right here on campus. Our site is clinic.ipm.iostate.edu. And you can follow us on Facebook. You probably already do if you're watching this. And we're right here on campus. You can find us in Google Maps. When you go on our site, you see all the different services that we do offer. And since this is EMTree, if you are interested in submitting a sample for evergreens, pine, spruce, or conifers, or trees or shrubs, we do have very specific instructions on what type of sample we hope to get to investigate a plant problem. And always remember, we do love photos in the clinic that accompany a sample because we can collect lots and lots of clues from it. In fact, our whole workflow in the clinic is putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Those clues on digital photos that if you join us in part 1 of the series, you remember me talking about the patterns, how to look at are the symptoms from the top of the tree or shrub, from the side, or from the inside of the plant outward. And the clinic then will also collect clues from that submission form And then we will use the sample that you provide to us, and we always hope that it is fresh, representative. But keep in mind that sometimes the pathogen may not be where you're seeing the symptoms. And that's what makes diagnostics of shrubs and trees somewhat challenging, making sure that you do have the correct tissue for that test. And this is a very interesting and exciting process, but it can also mean that I need to brainstorm with my colleagues and consult with experts. And believe me, I consult with a lot of experts. So there's so much to learn. The recordings for the sessions are now available. We know that we won't be able to answer all your questions today, so we released an article with some of the questions from prior parts to those workshops that we were not able to answer live. And remember, join us for the hands-on programs in the fall. And as I was telling you, I consult a lot with a lot of my colleagues, and one of those colleagues is Dr. Jeff Isles, who helps me a lot with plant ID and variety selection to recommend to our clients and also care in general. So with that, Jeff, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Lena. Get my screen pulled up here and we'll get on with it. Yes. Well, it's a beautiful time of the year. And again, thanks for the invite. It's fun to be on the EMTree program. And my job tonight is to talk about plant lists, about recommended plants for the Iowa landscape. And after this past year, after the derecho, after the cold winter temperatures that we had, it's a question that I get a lot, and I'm sure it's a question that you get a lot. What can I plant in my yard? And I like to go to where trees hang out. So if I'm looking for suggestions or ideas for what to plant in my own yard, I like to visit Arboretum Botanic Gardens. This, of course, is the Brenton Arboretum down in Dallas Center, but we are blessed with many great Arboretum Botanic Gardens in the state of Iowa. But you can really get a feel for how trees are going to grow and mature and how they're going to perform in our climate by visiting some of these great resources. So take advantage of the resources we have really at every corner of the state. As Lena mentioned, it's also fun just to go out into the landscape this time of the year and see what's happening, and maybe take photos of plants that you find attractive, or maybe something that you might want to include in your own yard. The crab apples are just starting to bloom here in central Iowa. Further south in the state, they're probably past bloom time. But this is one I photographed this morning. This is a selection called Centurion that is kind of vase-shaped, at least when it's young, and then spreads out as it gets older. But there are hundreds of great selections of crab apples. Which brings me to plant lists. Now, Lena mentioned a great website, the HHPN website, and at that site, you can find lots of great plant lists. But for the novice, and I know I'm speaking to a learned audience here this evening, but for the novice gardener, when they look at a list like this, it must look like they're reading Greek. It's rather confusing. And so I've highlighted one plant selection here in red just to familiarize yourself with what these plant lists are all about. And so what we're looking at here is a selection of Miyabi maple. It's a maple from Asia. And the selection is called Morton, but it's sold under a trademark called State Street. So State Street maple. And it's become rather popular in the state of Iowa. Notice its dimensions. I think those are important things to pay attention to. So this particular tree will grow 50 feet tall, 35 feet across at maturity, and has more of an upright oval growth habit. That information is going to be helpful when you go to plug a tree like this into your landscape. If you've got a small yard, then perhaps State Street is the wrong tree for you, and you might want to choose one that has a narrower crown, or maybe one that matures at a smaller height. But I know these plant lists can be rather confusing and maybe intimidating for the average homeowner, and therefore they do take some interpretation. So what about then when we all go to garden centers and nurseries, and it's one of my favorite pastimes to visit garden centers and nurseries, but how confident are we that these places are carrying plants that are appropriate for our region, and that there's enough information provided to clients to make an informed decision? And again, this is what I do. I'm quite at home in garden centers and nurseries. I feel comfortable there. But if somebody asked me to do brain surgery, I'd probably be lost. And now I'm not drawing a comparison between brain surgery and horticulture, but I think you get what I'm trying to get at here. Remember too that the plants that we talk about and love and deal with are living commodities. These are living, breathing, if you will, organisms that can be stressed if they're not handled well in garden centers and nurseries. Now, of course, these things don't talk, so we really don't know their history, but imagine a lot of these plants might begin their lives in nurseries in different states. They get thrown on a truck, they get shipped to Iowa, and sometimes they're blown over or they're beat up or damaged while they're on the sales lot. In fact, very few good things happen to plants as they await sale on the sales lot. And that's not a knock against our industry, which does a great job. But just keep in mind that stresses can accumulate on plants as they await sale. And so our job is to then recommend plants that have not been stressed unnecessarily. I'm showing you a map of Iowa, and this is the USDA hardiness zone map. And it gives you a feel for low temperatures that we might expect during the winter. And this year, at least in Ames, we experienced temperatures close to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And that puts us in zone 5A. But notice that most of the state of Iowa is in zone 5. Now that could be 5A or 5B, but there's a big difference between Kossuth County and Lee County. I think we'd all agree with that. And that Kossuth County would probably be a more challenging environment, at least during the winter months, for our woody plants. And so it's good to know something about hardiness zones, but they don't tell the entire story. So here's an example. This is a rhododendron that I photographed just a few days ago at a local plant emporium. And I want to draw your attention to some of the information that appears on the plant tag. Now notice that it tells us something about cold hardiness, but that figure isn't all that helpful. In fact, let me put my glasses on so I can read it. Notice that it says this plant can handle temperatures between minus 10 and minus 20. Well, that's not a whole lot of help to me. Will it handle temperatures minus 21? What about minus 22? Or does this label mean I might get in trouble by temperatures only at minus 10? And so my point here is that the plant label is an important document, but I sure would like to see more information like this. In fact, what I prefer to see on that label is this plant does prefer a protected site. And what does that mean? Well, it usually means a courtyard or maybe an eastern exposure. Unfortunately, that information is not available to us on this plant label. It also should probably warn me that this plant requires shelter from the wind and the winter sun. And if it doesn't get that, it might not have a very successful life. And finally, what doesn't appear on this tag is that these plants typically prefer more of an acidic soil reaction. And when they're not given that, they sometimes fail. So it kind of pains me to see plants like this being sold for the Iowa market for one, not given enough information to make an informed decision. And secondly, I have a strong suspicion these plants might not do very well for us in our climate. So as you advise your clients, have them do some research before going to the garden center, and then maybe do research after leaving the garden center before buying anything, because this is a plant that has a specific niche and wouldn't do well planted out in the open. Here's one more example. This is a flowering tree called Kwanzan cherry, and there isn't a whole lot of information at all to go on here. Yes, it likes full sun. Yes, it has beautiful flowers, but there isn't a whole lot of other information to go on. And those of you that live in Kossuth County or Story County, I pose the question to you, when's the last time you saw a Kwanzan cherry in your landscape? And I think you'd be hard-pressed to answer in the affirmative. And that really means, or that it tells me, and I know this for a fact, that Kwanzan cherry is probably better used in zone 5B. In fact, it's probably a much better plant for Iowa City or maybe Donaldson, Iowa, than it would be in Ames. So I'm not trying to make plant lists or plant selection more difficult than what it is, but it does require some investigation, some careful study, because as the old adage goes, you want to choose the right plant for the right site. And all too often we can buy plants that might not be appropriate for our region. Anyway, that's a quick treatment of plant lists and how to read a plant label. Thanks for the invite, and I hope you all have a great spring season.
Thanks, Jeff. And be sure to start typing in any questions that you have for any of our speakers this evening. I am going to share my screen a minute here. So my name is Laura Isles. I'm entomologist here with Iowa State University. And I got to visit with all of you a week ago about insects. And so I wanted to share a resource with you. This is a website called Bug Guide. This is a wonderful website if you're interested in insects and photographing insects. And I know we've been talking a lot tonight about photographing the wonderful, beautiful trees, but I also put a plug in for photographing all the cool insects. Insects can be a little more difficult to photograph, but you don't really need certainly you can get like a camera with a good macro lens and things like that. I use my cell phone a lot, and then a point and shoot camera. I've always been told that the best camera is the camera that you have on you. And so a small camera that fits in my pocket works best for me. But amongst the, point and shoot cameras, things like a good zoom, a picture here of the bee there, that's, you can be quite far away with a good zoom lens, and things like that are things to look for. But if you're taking photographs and you're trying to ID your insect, this is a great website to come to. This is completely all volunteers identifying insects. This website is run out of Iowa State University, but all the people doing all these identifications are volunteers. So I just wanted to show you really quick, just some real basics of how to use this. You can submit insects for identification, but I also just use it to kind of learn about insects. You can come in and see that somebody identified this insect as a miner bee 3 minutes ago. And if you're like, oh, that's really interesting, you can just click on that thumbnail and it will bring you, and now you can see, okay, this string here, you can find about all the different miner bees. You can click back and see all the different miner bees there, and then there's often some information about all the different genera of the bees. And again, amazing volunteers have put all this information together with all this information, the habitat, the range, information about the life cycle. This will vary depending on the insect and the group, if someone's taken the time to put this information in there. But you want to make sure you're on this info tab up there. If you just want to look at pictures, you can just click on the images tab and there'll be nothing but different pictures of it. Data will tell you where this insect has been found. And since we're on, a pretty family level, they've been found in, every state. But if we were to drill down to just, a single species of bee, we might not have them found in Iowa or not. So that's kind of one way to drill through the guide. And if you think like, okay, I'm pretty sure I have an ant, but I want to learn more about the ant. So this is the whole family of ants. And so there's so many different tribes of ants and things like that. So again, this is very fun for people who really want to learn a lot about insects, for kids and things like that, but all sorts of information about ants. And then you can drill down through the taxonomy. Doesn't mean a lot to most of us. Even I've forgotten most of my taxonomy. I learned all that in grad school and haven't had to use it a whole lot since. But then you can check out the different tribes and things like that. So just wanted to make you aware of this resource, and that if you wanted to get an insect ID, you can create an account, and then you can come in and just submit photos for identification. I can say that, remember that it's volunteers, and so many photos just cannot be identified, but you can submit a photo. It's best if the insect pretty much takes up the entire size of the photo, so you can crop down insects. Sometimes they do end up in what is called frass, which frass is what you would expect it to be. Frass is the name for insect poop. So if the photo can't be identified, it does very often get just moved to frass. So try not to be offended if your photo gets moved to frass. Some pictures here of not insects and things like that will just get moved to frass sometimes. And sometimes a volunteer will be able to identify it, and they might identify the insect, but it's something they have so many pictures of they just discarded at that point anyway. So just wanted to make you aware of that resource. And then before we go and take questions from all of you, and we'll bring Lena back in, just wanted to make you aware of that website that Lena was talking about, the Horticulture and Home Pest News. It does have a tree and shrub care page where those tree lists that Jeff was talking about, you can access those tree lists there. There's videos on how to plant trees, care of newly planted trees, and some basic information on how to identify tree problems and all those things. So again, check out this website if you kind of want your one-stop shop for a lot of different tree resources. So I'm going to stop sharing. Well, Kevin will make me stop sharing. And then we're all here, so we're happy to answer any questions that you might have this evening. So our first question is a good one. Emerald ash borer has killed many trees in my community. And what are good trees, good ash replacements? So good question about the EABs. We'll talk briefly about the EAB and then pass it to Jeff. So emerald ash borer, if you're not, most of us are familiar. We've still got a good portion of Northwest Iowa that doesn't have emerald ash borer. But certainly if you have an ash tree, this is the time to be treating it or to be doing those tree replacements. And so this is probably one of the most common questions you get, Jeff. So how do you kind of talk someone through this?
It is. It's a great question, and it might be the most frequently asked question that I get. And it's kind of like asking which are my favorite toppings on a pizza, because there are so many choices. I mean, and that's the nice thing. We have so many plant choices we can use for in Iowa. And I would turn that question around. What do you want your tree to do for you? Are you looking for a shade tree? And if so, do you have preferences of foliage quality or foliage color in the fall? Are you looking for an ornamental tree, or maybe both? And so it's really hard without knowing some information about your yard and about your likes and dislikes to answer that question. So then we point you to plant lists, and that's where the confusion comes in, because you're then confronted with an overwhelming number of plants. But what I try to tell clients is that try to think of what you want that tree to do for you, and what kind of aesthetic attributes you want to see, and also to make sure that you're not planting something that isn't going to cause trouble for you. There are some plants that show up in nurseries and garden centers that have some issues. They're popular plants, but they might have issues. One is kind of a hidden one. You probably have heard of a tree called autumn blaze maple, which is probably the most popular shade tree in the state of Iowa, and for good reason. It grows fast, it has beautiful fall color, but it's overused. And therefore, we're a little bit concerned in the state of Iowa that we've overused not only autumn blaze maple, but also maples in general. And so this is it's a great question, but it's not an easy one to answer. And I would invite you to give me a call or send me an email message, and we can speak at length about that sometime.
Okay, so Mary Jo asks, I have a nest of bees in the ground in my berry patch. I've tried several things to get rid of them. I'm concerned for my grandchildren. What would you suggest? So this is a great question. We get lots of questions similar to this each year. There's certainly bees, and if it is a bee and one of our native pollinators, and it's not where people are going to be, you can leave them alone. We also have a lot of ground nesting wasps, like the yellow jacket wasps, which can be very dangerous, and you definitely want to control. So regardless, unfortunately, if an insect has chosen to make its nest where people could encounter that and get stung, you do want to control it. If this is happening every year, you could look at, can we use some mulch or things like that to discourage them? But if it's, this year and you see the bees going in and out, what you want to use is a dust insecticide. So nothing liquid, nothing granule, the dust, and just place that in the entrance and do this at night, and don't do this if you're allergic. And you can certainly, hire someone to come and do this, but you put that dust in the entrance at night. And then during the day, the bees will track that insecticide down into the nest, and that should provide control. You want to do this you wouldn't want to do it before rain or something like that, but the dust is what you want to use. And, there's kind of a lot of things out there with people, trying to pour things down and possibly fire and things like that. All those are dangerous and definitely not recommended. So dust insecticide if you're not allergic to bee stings in the evening when they're not active, or very early in the morning while it's still cool.
I can start and I can show you here the site that I wanted for you to remember is our Horticulture and Home Pest News. And the feature that I have not shown you yet is that you can actually use the search bar in there. So you see, you can start typing things in there and a lot of resources will start coming up. So your question is, what do you recommend to remedy? And there are at least 2 different diseases that in Iowa cause needle casts. We have our encyclopedia articles for them. And as you browse them, you can see what are the symptoms that you see that browning in the case of stigmina, the signs. You may have this black fungal bodies in there. And if you're not sure if you have stigmina or if you have rhizosphaera, and sometimes you may have both, then you can contact us in the clinic and we can take a look on a sample. The answer is more related with horticulture than chemical or anything else. Even though you may try some sanitation, you may try some good care for these trees, inevitably we see a lot of these 2 needle casts in Iowa. And so again, and maybe Jeff, if you want to pitch in, we want you to think about what you want from your tree that you're planting and the type of care that you can provide.
Great points, Lena, and I'll just piggyback onto some of those. Not all spruce are alike. So we do find that the Colorado spruce and cultivars are the ones that seem to have the most trouble with these pathogens that cause the needle cast diseases. I'm not anti-Colorado spruce, but if I'm going to use that species, I'm going to put it out in the center of the yard where there's full sun and good air movement. And we find that if there's good air movement around the plant, then perhaps these diseases won't find it right away, and the tree will have a good long life. But there are spruce like white spruce and Serbian spruce that do pretty well. They're not immune to the needle cast diseases, so use them wisely. Give them plenty of room, and usually you'll have pretty good luck. But with spruce come a few challenges. So I was watching this one as it came up in the chat box from Flower Lady. I like that name, and so I would invite the Flower Lady to walk through the woods. And when you're looking at trees in the woods, you'll notice a lot of organic matter that is touching the trunks of trees. And I know the recommendation today is that we keep the bark mulch away from the trunks of trees, and it's probably a good one, but I think it's a bit overstated. So I don't get too worried about mulch touching the trunks of trees. What we're trying to avoid is the volcano mulching, where you've piled mulch up onto the trunk of the tree 8 or 10 inches deep. I don't get too worried about a couple of inches, and I certainly don't get too worried about mulch touching the trunk. But the current recommendation today is that you back the mulch away from the tree. But even if you have mulch touching the trunk, I don't think it's causing too many problems. The Flower Lady also goes on to talk about some bark splitting or cracking, and that probably has nothing to do with the mulch touching the trunk. It could be caused by something else. I could only guess. Many times a photo is very helpful in diagnosing these kinds of problems, but don't beat yourself up over that one. I doubt if it had anything to do with the mulch.
Jeff, would you like?
Sorry.
So.
Oh, I need my glasses sometimes. Oh, any thoughts on raising the canopy of? This is live TV, folks. Raising the canopy of spruce trees. Well, it has to happen sometimes, especially if your spruce is growing out over your sidewalk or over your patio or driveway. And therefore, it looks a little bit different. It's not the classic look we want from our spruce. But if it has to be done, it has to be done. So if you've got a branch that's offending or getting in the way, then you take it right back to the main stem. Don't cut it off midway, but you take it right back to the main trunk. Whether you do that all the way around the tree to make it look symmetrical, or only do it on one side, that's a judgment call. There really is no right or wrong way to do that.
Great question. And we do have a couple of articles that I'd like to show you. In general, mushrooms can take advantage of cracks or just get into the wood of trees, and that can be problematic. There is this, let me see. So when you look for mushrooms in the HHPN or the Horticulture and Home Pest News, we do have a couple of answers for you and some photos. The thing is, you can't get rid of the mushroom per se, because what you're seeing is the analogous of a flower on a plant. So the mushroom is all this microscopic mycelium that you won't see, and it's either living in the soil and getting into the wood right at the base of the tree, or it's taking advantage of a wound and then starting to rot that wood. And the rod can be either a white rod or a brown rod. And I think the most important thing that you should consider is that a lot of mushrooms can be associated with living and declining trees, but they can pose a hazard. And it's important to have those trees evaluated, because if we have another event like last year's derecho, that's the type of tree that can fail. And so we do have, you know, in this particular article here, we do have a resource if you're looking on how to choose an arborist. There's great tips in there, because it's important to assess that tree. What is the surroundings? Is it close to a house or structures? And what may happen. But unfortunately, there's no treatment that you can do once a tree has a mushroom on it. Yes, so this is a question that we get every spring, and we do have a resource for that. It happens in ash very often, and sycamores often, and especially because it's the springtime, I want to show you, if you go into that website and look for anthracnose, here we go. So in the spring, this is a fungal disease. There's pathogens, there's various pathogens that will go into the foliage of ash, sycamore, walnut, linden, hickory, a lot of different trees. And this fungus overwinters on the wood of the tree, on the small petioles and twigs. And so in the spring, when temperatures are conducive for the awakening of those pathogens, they will start causing problems on the leaves. Normally, you'll see that they will have lesions on the veins that will expand on the leaves. And unfortunately, that does mean that there will be a lot of leaves that will fall in the spring. For the most part, this is something that, again, we see every year in the spring, and that it alone, it's not going to be deadly. But if the tree has other factors, stressors, or other diseases or insects, all together, they may cause decline or other problems. I'll put this link on our chat too. That's a
We're
tough
staying
one.
muted.
So Lena, what do you think about that question?
Boy, it depends. I don't do that because I have a lot of other weeds in my lawn that I don't want to move to places where my lawn is, like, the front is really clean, the back is terrible. So I don't want to do that. But again,
So the good news is we have turf grass specialists in my department. I'll mention the gentleman's name that came to my mind, Dr. Adam Tomes, THOMS. It would probably have a ready answer for that one, but that's out of my depth. So I think we'll punt that one to Dr. Tomes. Of course, he's not here tonight.
Okay, so how does water impact the plant and the formation of insects? Too much or too little? So great question. So insects really respond a lot more to temperature, a little bit to, the health of the host plant, but, water on the plant doesn't really make much of a difference to insects. That's a bit more of a disease thing. So we'll let Lena talk a little bit about water on plants and diseases.
yeah, so a lot of the pathogens that cause plant diseases, bacteria, fungi, oomycetes, or water molds, do depend on water available in the surface of the tissue that they're colonizing, on dews, and rainfall to splash. And so it's important, as you're installing a new tree or a new plant in general, to water infrequently and deeply, and to avoid creating a lot of excessive dew, when you're watering and creating all this splash, because that will definitely help pathogens, bacteria, fungi, and water molds.
Okay, I have some bees about fly size, brownish blonde in color in the ground next to the spirea. Are they pollinators? Do they sting? And should they try to get rid of them? So great question. So I'm not certain from that description what it could be. And certainly your bees, if you're willing to try to get a photo of them. I know bees can be hard to get photos of sometimes if they're going in and out of the ground. You can place a jar or something over that hole and try to catch an adult in it. I put insects into my refrigerator to cool them off and slow them down. Some people don't like insects in the refrigerator, so definitely let everyone in the house know that you're sticking an insect into the refrigerator for photographing purposes. And then I'm happy to help you identify it. So in general, most of our bees and wasps are pollinators. They all feed on pollen and nectar, and are beneficial in that way. And most of them that you see, they're all females and capable of stinging. So again, it's one of those things that if it's not a place that you're going to be standing, they haven't stung you in the past, I wouldn't worry about controlling them. But if they become numerous, and especially our bees and most of our native bees, very often it's just one female bee, and she's just, taking care and feeding her young, and are very unaggressive and won't sting. But if you start seeing many individual bees going into the ground, that's less likely to be bees and more likely to be one of our wasp species. And then again, we're back to, either hiring, most of the landscape companies can help take care of that, or a dust insecticide in that hole at night or early in the morning. But a lot of those colony nesting wasps, like the yellow jackets, can be very aggressive. So you want to be cautious, try to control them.
I do get that question every now and then. Sometimes the trunk of a tree will have like this look, this wetness to it. And it really depends. So there is something known as wet wood that is not considered a disease. It's more of, there's bacteria that, as water accumulates in cracks of trees or places where there's not a lot of airflow, bacteria will use that humidity to multiply, but it's not necessarily causing any disease. In fact, when plant pathologists have tried to take that bacteria and infect trees, they don't cause disease. But there's something else that is slime flux. And that's when you have bacteria that actually ferments different substances in there, and that creates pressure on the tree. and then you'll see more of a foam, like you had just dish soap getting out of the tree. And that can be more problematic. I think that's one that can cause some decay eventually in the tree. And very recently, I was aware of one that is a yeast that will start in the trunk as this wetness, and in time it becomes orange and almost like insulation foam, but very bright orange. And that's a yeast, not a bacteria, a yeast, so a unicellular fungi that just uses whatever it can and thrives on that environment. And unfortunately, not in any treatments that we can recommend for any of those that I'm aware of.
Well, we're looking for other questions. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in, but I think this is the end. Oh, we have one more.
Oh, great. Last insect one. So if you see an ant colony by a bush, does that mean trouble? So great answer. No, it does not. Ant colonies, only if they build a big enough mound to bury like the turf, would we maybe block photosynthesis, but no problem at all. They're great aerators and move through the garden. And sometimes they care for aphids on your plants, but again, that's some great things to observe for. So don't worry about ant colonies at all.
And again, if you have any other questions, put them in, or feel free to contact Lena or Laura at the Plant Insect Diagnostic Clinic. And we hope you guys will join us this fall for our hands-on workshops. Thanks again.